So I'm good. Oh, goodness. No, I don't know. Sometimes you have, well, I put things in my phone all the time, like do this for the newsletter or possible teaching. I sat down the other day and I thought, I'm just going to knock this out real quick. I'll be done several days early, go over it. I sat there for like 2 hours. Nothing. I'm like, oh my gosh, God, you're going to make me get up there and have nothing to say? So today, finally we got somewhere. You can throw that picture up there. So I saw this on Facebook. Tracy Stewart shared it. She shares some good things. But it struck something in me and got me thinking, my only job is to be empty. So what does that mean? This is my hypothesis. This is my thesis statement, that we have but one job, as this said. It's not my original idea, but that is to be an empty vessel. Our greatest depiction of being this empty vessel is, of course, Jesus. He's our greatest depiction of everything, right? And I know three things, and we know a lot of things about Jesus through the Word. Jesus is the Word. We know that. That's a truth. But here's three things that I know to be true about Jesus that I think relates to vessels. Just sometimes I feel like I'm all over the place, so just bear with me. I also feel like this is very basic, so bear with me. If you're too mature for it, then just sit. Jesus was submitted to God. His mind, his will, and his body, right? We could say that's a fact about Jesus. He spent time with his Father. The Bible tells us this often. And then he was poured out as God flowed through him. Okay, we read about this a lot in the New Testament as well. And we're supposed to be like Jesus, right? So we are supposed to do these three things just as Jesus did. So what sort of vessel was Jesus? Like in Timothy, it tells us that there's different kinds of vessels, but that's not really what I'm talking about when I say what kind of vessel Jesus was, because it's not what the purpose of the vessel is. If I'm a vessel and Savannah's a vessel, we don't have to have the same purpose. Our purpose doesn't matter, but it's what inside the vessel that matters, okay? Jesus was an amazing vessel. I was thinking today, what if you had an artist depict a vessel that depicted Jesus? It would probably be intricate and amazing and beautiful. But Jesus was amazingly empty. His vessel was empty. The world doesn't value emptiness. If you walked around telling everybody, I'm empty, they're okay, well, that's good. That's not anything to be excited about. But emptiness is valued to God. Emptiness means availability. If I come to God empty, that means he can work with me in any way he wants to. I want us to look at 2 Kings 4, 1 through 4. We'll talk about some empty vessels. Now the wife of a son of the prophets cried to Elisha, "Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that your servant feared the Lord. But the creditor has come to take my 2 sons to be his slaves." Elisha said to you, "What shall I do for you?" Don't you love that? Well, save my sons. What do you mean? Do something. "Tell me, what do you have of value in the house?" She said, "Your handmaid has nothing in the house except for a jar of oil." Then he said, "Go around and borrow vessels from all your neighbors." Empty vessels. Okay? Empty. And he said, not a few. So he was specific. You need a lot, and they need to be emptied. "And when you come in, shut the door upon you and your sons, then pour out the oil you have into all of those vessels, setting aside each one when it is full." Okay? Empty vessels have very little monetary value in the natural. If you're going to buy an empty bottle, it's probably going to be cheaper than a bottle full of something, right? But for her, those empty vessels were the most valuable vessels she could get her hands on. If they had already been full, they would have been no use to her. She needed them empty so that she could have them filled with the value of what God was about to pour in. The oil was provided by God, and that was the very thing that saved her sons. She was able to pay her debt. That's awesome. Save her son. That's awesome. And then live off of the rest of the money from that oil. Okay, her sentence, her husband dying left her a widow. She had 2 sons, so she still had a chance, but there was debt. Those 2 sons being imprisoned leaves her with no value. She basically has nothing to look forward to in life, no hope. But God not only paid her debt, restored her sons, but gave her enough to live on, all with empty vessels. So I am talking about you and I, me and Andy, me and Sharon, all of us being empty vessels like Jesus. If I had 2 identical jars, okay, so picture this in your mind because I don't have them. But if you had 2 identical jars and one was empty and the other one had things in it, even though they originally had the same volume. So like, in math, we can calculate the volume of a cylinder. There's a formula of that. Even though those 2 jars have the same volume once, now that we've put things inside the one, the volume has changed. Okay? It can no longer hold the same amount. So even though the size of the jars are same, the original volume of those jars are same, because it's cluttered with things, they can no longer hold the same amount. It's not empty. It's not as valuable to God. So if I'm a vessel and I want to hold the same volume that Jesus held, I must do as Jesus did, and I must become empty. So how do we do this? How do we become empty? I can try to clean out my vessel. Have you all been down that road? Like, well, I'm going to clean this up. I can make a list of things to get rid of. I need to get rid of pride. I need to get rid of this. I need to get rid of that. I can make a list, and I can make sub-points under that. And how do I get rid of each of those little things? And I can check off that list, and I can maybe be better. I'll give you an example. Fear. I like to give those examples all the time. I might be afraid of heights. I'm really not. I'm just afraid of falling from those heights. So I decide to face it. I'm going to conquer that height fear problem. I'm going to climb a high cliff. I'm going to sit on top of it, dangling my feet, despite my fear. In reality, I haven't eradicated my fear at all. I've just done something in spite of it. That's it. I haven't done anything with my fear. It's still there. Pride, fear, lust, doubt, they are all rooted in something. As you know, if you've been here long, I dealt with fear. And I didn't just get it. I didn't just see it one day sitting on the side of the road and go, hey, I think I'll deal with fear for a while. It came through trauma. It was in my vessel, okay? It was in there. It was muddying up the waters. That's Mike's new favorite saying this week. I don't know why he keeps telling me that, but it was in there. It was in my vessel. So how do you or I get something like fear out of our vessel? This is profound. Are you ready? It's not. It's simple. It's submission. It's not doing the opposite of fear. Like if you're a prideful person, you're not going to get rid of pride by being humble or doing humble acts. So a prideful person can still give to the poor. They can still sweep the parking lot. They can serve in the coffee shop. And they can still be prideful as can be. It doesn't doing the opposite of something. I used to think fear. I used to think I'll just do the opposite. I'll be brave. Anytime something fearful comes up, I'll just do it anyway. That didn't stop me from being fearful. It didn't do anything. But I found it was through submission that things changed. What was the first thing I said about Jesus? He was submitted to God. Jesus was submitted to God. So I'm going to read a bunch of verses that talks about Jesus' idea of submission. John 5:19. So Jesus answered them by saying, I assure you, most solemnly I tell you, the Son is able to do nothing of himself, of his own accord, but he is able to do only what he sees his Father doing. For whatever the Father does is what the Son does in the same way in his turn. That's submission. I'm supposed to be like Jesus. Remember, that's our goal, right? Is to look like Jesus. I am supposed to be so submitted that I only do what I see Jesus do. And Jesus only did what he saw his Father do. Matthew 4:3-4. And the tempter came and said to him, if you are God's Son, command these stones to be made loaves of bread. But he replied, it is written, man shall not live and be upheld and sustained by bread alone, but by every word that comes forth from the mouth of God. Have you ever went 40 days without eating? I have not. If I go one day without eating, I'm like famished. Jesus was hungry. He was a man. He was a human being. He was hungry. So we might say, why would the devil think he could tempt Jesus with bread? Because the man was hungry. But he said, no, I live off of my Father. Matthew 26:39. And going a little farther, he threw himself upon the ground on his face, and he prayed, saying, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not what I will, not what I desire, but what you will and desire. And we know this is when he's getting ready to go to be crucified. He knew what was going to happen. He knew it was going to be painful and it was going to be hard to experience, but he was willing. He had submitted his mind, his body, his will. Everything was God. It wasn't even like, I don't want to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. He wasn't a brat. He didn't want to do it, but he was willing. Matthew 26:42, just a couple verses later. Again, so a second time. Again, a second time, he went away and he prayed, and he said, my Father, if this cannot pass by unless I drink it, your will be done. He submitted. John 6:38. For I have come down from heaven not to do my own will and purpose, but to do the will and purpose of him who sent me. See, John 6:38 should be our tagline after we get saved. For Melissa, I have not come here today to do my will. Because I'm saved, set free, filled with the Holy Spirit. I'm submitted to God. So I'm here today to do the purpose of the one who sent me. That's what our lives should be every day. Philippians 2:5-9. This one's a little long. Let the same attitude and purpose and humble minds be in you, which was in Jesus Christ. Let him be your example in humility, who, although being essentially one with God and in the form of God, possessing the fullness of the attributes which made God God, did not think this equality with God was a thing to be eagerly grasped or retained, but stripped, or the NASB says emptied. Remember, we're supposed to be an empty vessel. Jesus emptied himself of all privileges and rightly dignity, so as to assume the guise of a servant or slave, in that he became like man, was born a human being, and had appeared in human form. He abased and humbled himself still further and carried his obedience to the extreme of death, even to the cross. Therefore, because he stood so low, God has exalted him highly and freely bestowed on him the name that is above every other name. He humbled himself in obedience, even to the extreme of death. We don't humble ourselves in obedience, even to the extreme of not watching our phones for 6 hours. We don't humble ourselves in obedience like Missy and Colt did and go talk to our neighbor about the Holy Spirit. We want to say we want to be like Jesus, but we can't even think about doing even close to what Jesus did. How can we claim that we're like Christ? Jesus was an empty vessel. If you could look at his vessel, it wouldn't be ornate and beautiful. It would be clear and empty. That's what Jesus was. It wasn't about Jesus. It wasn't about Jesus was the Word, is the Word. He was there from the beginning. Nothing was created without him. That wasn't what Jesus was about. Jesus was, I'm a vessel. I'm here to do the will of God. If you see me, you see the Father. That's what Jesus was. Okay, so I'm going to show you 2 clips from my favorite show in the whole entire world. I don't know, I said something about it before when I taught. God had just been impressing on me, like thinking about what Jesus was like as a man on earth. And if you've never watched the Chosen series, it is amazing. It is amazing. And it like brings it to life in a way that you would never think. So the first clip is really short. And it's, before we show it, it's called Matthew 4:24 is what the whole episode. It's 30 minutes and it's about this one verse, and I'll read it. The news about him spread throughout all Syria, and they brought to him all who were ill, those suffering with various diseases and pains, demoniacs, epileptics, paralytics, and he healed them. Okay, so the first clip is short, but it shows that the disciples were not so empty vessels.
The same man you speak of bumped into me on his way out after Jesus healed his wife. I believe he's one of the men who arrived here last night.
Almost a 4-hour walk this morning, and we didn't even have a moment to settle in. I mean, it's great what he's doing, obviously, but I wish it would have happened tomorrow.
What is happening? What are we a part of? Is it wrong to say I have no idea?
No, it makes me feel better.
I think that I haven't had time to think about it.
Okay, so Jesus, in this episode, like if you would have seen it from the beginning, there's just a line of people, like this huge line of people. And some of the disciples are taking shifts, and they're like helping people with the line. But if you could see, one of the disciples, he says, we just walked 4 hours to get here, and he wants to jump right into healing people. Like, it's good, obviously, but couldn't we have just done it tomorrow? You know, he was not, I mean, and I know that this is just a depiction. It doesn't say that he said this in the Bible, but how many of us would say that? You know, Jesus, we just traveled all the way here. Couldn't we wait till tomorrow? Or, Jesus, it's 8 o'clock and she's just now going up to speak. Like, I'm tired and I'm ready to go home. Okay. And then let's look at the other clip. It's like 5 minutes, so just bear with it.
Good night.
That's his mother.
One more.
I'm a mess. Good. What would I do without you, Ima?
Get some sleep.
Okay. I'm so tired. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who brings sleep to my eyes and slumber to my eyelids. Blessed be your name, Lord my God, and God of my ancestors. And I lie down in peace, and that I arise in peace.
Okay. I cry the whole time I watch that show. We often look at Jesus as a genie. When we read these stories, we don't really think about it. We think that he just walked through town waving God's magic healing wand. But this depicts him as spending all day on his feet, after walking 4 hours to get there, to tend to the needs to every person, while his disciples argued and complained while sitting around a fire doing nothing? Which vessel are you like? Are you the one that would stand until your feet were so sore you could barely take off your shoes? Are you the one that would encounter each and every person that came because they heard that Jesus was there today to heal the sick? Would you stand with every person? That's the way they depicted it. It didn't really show it, but they showed the line of people. But that's the way they depicted, is that he would sit with each and every person and have a personal encounter with them as they were healed. Did Jesus tire? He was a man. It says he left his deity, right? Was it his will? Was it his desire to spend hours meeting with each and one of these people, allowing God to move through him? Or was it God's will? Because it didn't matter to Jesus what Jesus wanted. It only mattered what God wanted. It doesn't matter what Melissa wants. Are you guys there yet? Because I'm pretty sure I got saved today. Am I there where I say, it doesn't matter what I want anymore, God? It just matters what God wants. Why are we not more like him? Why am I not more like him? Why is my vessel too full? Anything that remains in my vessel, anything that remains in yours, it's because it's unsubmitted. I'm unsubmitted if I have anything in my vessel. It didn't matter what it cost Jesus. It didn't matter how much of him it took. It didn't matter how much of his time, his resources. Maybe you've burned your external ships, but have you submitted everything in your vessel? Have you allowed God to clean it out? What are your thoughts? Are they his thoughts? What are your desires? Are they his? Where's your heart positioned? Is it at his feet? Truly, because we say these things. We say them, but is it true? Look at Mary and Martha. We all know the telling, the story. Martha was submitted to her role, her expectations, her duty. Martha was a woman. She was supposed to clean up. She was supposed to make sure all the men had food. Mary was also a woman. That was also her role and her duty, but she was not submitted to that. She was submitted to him. She sat at his feet. She wasn't being lazy, as her sister suspected. She wasn't being lazy. That's why Martha got corrected by Jesus whenever she came to him telling on her sister. He said, no, she has chosen what is right. She has chosen to submit to him. What she was doing, and I don't blame Martha. Martha was doing what the world expected of her. But she wasn't doing the will of God. Mary was a woman pushing against the expectations placed on her. She was doing things that only men could do. Do you know how hard that would have been in that time period? Do you know how hard it is now to push against expectations, whether you're a man or woman, to whatever's put on you? It's hard to push past that. She was doing things only men could do. She was learning from the rabbi, and that was no place for a woman. But she was submitted. Submission is an act. It's a choice. How do you submit to the speed limit? Here's a simple example. You go the speed limit. That's how you submit to it. You make a choice. The sign says 45, I'll go 45. You submit to that law. I can choose to entertain feelings of anger, and I could submit to those, or I can submit to God. It's my choice. Emotionally, things don't always feel like a choice, but they are. No matter how hard it was for Jesus to submit, he did so because he chose only to do what the Father did. It wasn't easy. It doesn't matter that Jesus was who Jesus was. It wasn't easy to submit to what he submitted to. In my own life, I thought that fear was uncontrollable. And we can think that. We can feel out of control. Have you all ever felt out of control? Anger feels out of control, right? Fear feels out of control. And I thought this was something I couldn't control, but I learned the hard way sometimes that when fear came in, I could submit to it or I could submit to God. But one way or another, I was submitting to something. I was making a choice to move to the left and say, okay, I'm going to run with this. Or I could move to the right and I'm going to say, no, I'm going to submit this under God. And I'm only going to do what Jesus did. And Jesus only did what the Father did, so I am not going to be afraid in this moment. It's a choice. It's not an easy choice because it was easier to be afraid. It was easier to just be afraid. In submitting, we are transformed. We are changed from the identity we adopted from the world and transformed to God's empty vessel, constantly being filled in order to be used. Submission isn't about doing, but about yielding. We are saved. We are kingdom-living people. What does that look like? Because to the world, it doesn't look like anything. If it doesn't look like Jesus, then it's wrong. I'll get personal. If I don't look like Jesus, then I'm wrong. If I come to you, if I walk up to Ashton and what comes out of my mouth and my attitude doesn't look like Jesus, then I'm wrong. Jesus was submitted. He spent time with his Father. That was the second thing I said. And he was poured out and used. But we can't do the latter two without the first. I don't think people have a problem. Christians don't always have a problem going to church. But how can you spend time with the Father when you're not submitted to him? How can you spend time with the Father so that you can be filled up, so that you can be poured out and used, if you're not submitted to him? I'll say it again. We can't do the latter two without doing the first. How can we spend time with God if we're not submitted? Look at the Pharisees. Perfect example. They read the word, they memorized it, they spent hours and hours in the temple, and they didn't see the Messiah standing before them. How many of us would see God standing before us? Charles Spurgeon once wrote in a sermon called "The Reason Many Cannot Find Peace," a lack of submission is no rare or new fault in mankind. Ever since the fall, it has been the root of all sin. From the moment when our mother Eve stretched out her hand to pluck the forbidden fruit and her husband joined her in setting up the human will against the divine, the sons of men have been universally guilty of a lack of conformity to the will of God. They choose their own way and will not submit their wills. They think their own thoughts and will not submit their understanding. They love earthly things and will not submit their affection. Man wants to be his own law and his own master. I can't be my own master and be submitted to God. Lack of submission is not new. As I just read, Adam and Eve had a choice. You have a choice. It's no longer my will but God's. Eve and Adam, they had a choice. My will says, I want this. But God said not to. Ask yourself now, you don't have to say it out loud, but ask yourself internally, are you struggling with anything that doesn't look like Jesus at this moment? Then submit it. Arrange it under God. I'll say that again, arrange it under God. In the New Testament, the word submit is translated from the Greek word, which I will not pronounce correctly. I don't even want to try it. Hupotasso. Hupotasso. That's not right. Hupo means under, and tasso means arrange. Submit comes from the word subject or subjection, and it fully means to obey, to put under, to subject to submit oneself unto, to put under subjection, to be under obedience, or to be obedient to. We have to obey God to submit to God. If you are rebelling against God in any way, you are not submitted to God. If we are not a clear vessel, if we're not submitted to God, how can we claim to be like Christ? How can we claim salvation? I watched a post the other day. I don't like being controversial, but I sent it to a pastor, and it had 6 Christians, as they claimed themselves to be, and they asked them a series of questions, and they were to answer that question by standing on a line that has like agree, strongly agree, definitely agree, disagree, strongly disagree, definitely disagree. One of the women there identified herself in the LGBT community. And she said that she had been hurt most by people saying, I love you, but what you're doing is wrong. She said it was very confusing to her, and she said that people didn't understand what they were asking her to do. She said, you're asking me to give up the very thing that I want. And as soon as she said that, I said, that's Christianity. It doesn't matter your wants. Whatever you want, you have to give up. Whatever you desire, if it doesn't look like Jesus, you have to say no to it. If we use that line of thinking, we can do whatever we want as long as we want it. So submission, I believe, is the answer. But submission has a really bad rap. If you just walk around and go, hey, do you want to submit today? No. Because submit is denying of yourself, right? Who has given submission a bad rap? The church has given submission a bad rap. Do you know that from the 1600s through, the Civil War, the Southern slave owners used the Bible to justify slavery? God wanted them to be enslaved. The Bible has been used to oppress women severely. Do you want to know why there's feminists running around? Because the world suppressed women for like 2,000 years. Me and Mike were talking about that. I don't know, we went to lunch to talk about what I was going to teach about, and I think we talked about like 23 different things. But I told him that I had been, because I want to be a good wife. I want to be a good godly wife. So I guess I was just kind of checking myself. Like, am I submitted enough? Am I following the verse like I'm supposed to, God? And you all may want to stone me afterwards. You men may not agree with me. Take it up with my pastor. He let me preach tonight. But God told me, he said, I didn't set you free to put you under the bondage of a man. He also told me, he said, the Bible doesn't say when Melissa and Mike get married, they become Mike. He said they become one. So I thought, I got to talk to Mike about this because maybe I didn't hear correctly. So me and Mike were talking, and he said, being the spiritual leader of the household means I have the responsibility. He said, I don't have the responsibility to lord over you. He said, that's not what God told me to do. God didn't tell me to be your ruler. But he said, God gave me the responsibility that if my family needs anything spiritually, I'm supposed to help them get it. And I said, okay, we're on the same page. We can stay married after 17 years. We're doing good. We're doing good. But submission has got a really bad name because nobody wants to submit. And if you want to get a group of liberal women mad, tell them they're supposed to submit because they have been showed a wrong way to submit. They have been showed a suppressive, dominating view of God, and it has made them dislike God when God is not in the way that man has showed those women God are. If they knew God, they would know that God doesn't bind me up, but he sets me free. Submission to God is never bondage. Like I said, it's freedom. Jesus came to set us free. God doesn't want to submit me as a slave, but as a son. And submission as a son brings freedom. So to be a vessel, I'm going to repeat the three things. You must be submitted to God. Then you can spend time with God. And then you can be used.